Welcome to the Gonzo Chronicles. I'm your host, Cyrus Alderwood, the official spokesman for Generation X. Stick around. It's going to get weird, as always. Hey, thanks for stopping by for another podcast. Today we have a very special guest, and I'm very glad. I've been waiting for a while to have Stephen James onto the podcast. Stephen James is the critically acclaimed best-selling author of 18 novels. He served as a contributing editor to Writer's Digest magazine, and he's the author of the groundbreaking nonfiction book story, Story Trumps Structure, and Troubleshooting Your Novel. When he's not working on his next book, Stephen teaches novel writing, intensive retreats across the country, with also New York Times bestselling author Robert Dugoni. And he also hosts a weekly podcast called The Story Blender, and where Stephen has interviewed more than 200 of the top storytellers and writers in the world. So, Stephen James, thanks for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate it. I've been excited to talk to you for a while about your current works and some of your past works, and
Sure, absolutely.
what's going on with you. So, how are things going? We're getting toward the end of the year. Are you working on anything new at the moment? And
I am. I have a new series that's releasing next year, early next year. So I'm working on the second one in that series. So honestly, I've had a hard time focusing. I have like a lot of irons in the fire right now, which I need to just like throw them all out and just focus on one thing and finish it up. But hopefully in the next couple months I'll be writing tonight after we're done chatting. So
well, you
looking
and me
forward to
both.
that.
We have next week starts National Novel Writing Month. NaNoWriMo to people who are, that love to write. It's NaNoWriMo for short. I imagine you don't take part in that because you're kind of taking part of it every month, all year long.
I've
Um,
never done that writing challenge. I think it's great if people want to focus on writing. I just don't think that you can probably say I'm going to write a whole novel in 1 month. There's very few people in the world that can pull that off. But hey, more power to you if you want to chomp into it and give it a shot. So
yeah, we're
yeah.
not Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, right? So, the I wanted to kind of bring first of all before we get into a lot of the different books, and a couple I really wanted to talk about. You have a new book out called Art of the Tale with Tom
Yeah.
Morrissey. Tell us a little bit about that and what brought that book on.
Well, Tom is a world-renowned speechwriter, and I thought it would be interesting if we did a book together from my perspective and background as a novelist and his as a corporate speechwriter, how to actually tell stories. So while it applies in some regards to writing, it's more for oral storytelling, presentations, business leaders, teachers, ministers, whoever it might be. And so what was fascinating about that is I really changed my view of what a story is when I was working on the Art of the Tale. And so it's got my new kind of theory about the 6 aspects of all great stories is in the Art of the Tale. And so that's kind of what I've been teaching over the last year is this new kind of different perspective that looks at story, not simply through a temporal lens of what happens when beginning, middle, end, first act, second act, third act, but more on the elemental level of what is essential for a great story to occur.
Yeah, and I really enjoy these books that not just your novels with stories and great action, adventure, and plot and theme and conflict, but you write these books that are also helpful to other writers, and the
Mm.
this workshops and seminars that you put on. I've been fortunate, I think, to have sat in on three of these now, that you've
Mm.
taught, and they've every single time been helpful, even to writers that have been in the room that have been writing for 20 plus years. There's
Mm.
always something new and so encouraging about the way you present these things. And I found it to be the same thing in your book, Story Trumps Structure. That was
Oh
I
yeah.
think I read that before I read any of your stories. So I read this book and I was like,
There you
okay,
go.
I want to learn a few things based off of a seminar that I sat in on. That with troubleshooting your novel. Um,
Hmm.
how has the reaction from other writers been that have read these and approached you over the years?
Well, it's super encouraging because there are a lot of books out there on plot and structure. Like, there's tons of books on how to structure and plot out and outline your books and so on. But there really weren't any books, and I have a bookshelf behind me right here with dozens, if not hundreds, of books on writing and screenwriting and I was like, there aren't any that really talk about organic writing or writing without an outline, writing without a plot, writing without a formula or template, and so on. So really, Story Trumps Structure was my attempt to sort of fill that void and write a book that says, okay, look, here's how to break the rules, the rules, whatever they are, and write better stories. And then troubleshooting your novel is really 80 super short chapters that deal with identifying and then solving plot problems, issues, anything with your novel. So the one is more kind of very, very practical. Story Trumps Structure, a little more theoretical about a different approach to writing.
And when you
But it's
say
been fun
breaking
to see.
yeah, when you say breaking the rules, you're not kidding. Right on the front of the book, on the cover, it says "break the rules." And as soon as I
Yeah.
saw that, I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to read that," because yeah, I never took
There
any
you go.
formal writing classes. I wasn't an English major in college, and it's like, yeah, the rules are made to be broken. And yeah, you really tackled that concept, that thought really well through the book. Um, I guess one thing that really stood out is a lot of writers will talk about how they have to have structure, a plot, an outline. And can you explain maybe to those that are out there, because I've talked to a lot of people some that listen to the show that want to start writing. What is the difference between having um, an outline and actually writing by the seat of your pants, or you call them pantsers, I think is during the seminar.
Well, yeah, I mean, some people will call them seat of your pants writers or pantsers, as you say, pantsers and plotters and so on like this. And I always actually look at it as organic writing in the sense that I feel like the more you understand what lies at the heart of a great story, the less you'll have to outline and the less you'll have to write by the seat of your pants, kind of the way I look at it. So really for me, it's like, what makes a story work? What are the ingredients, the elements of stories? And then as you understand that, it'll inform you as you write the story. So some people want to some people want to lay out the plot before they've written the action. And Ray Bradbury has a great quote. I don't know that this is word for word, but he said that plot is the action that plot is the tracks in the snow that are left after the action has occurred. Okay, so plot is what you have after the characters have gone on their way to these amazing adventures. So to sit there and say I'm going to plot out my story before it occurs is to write the story exactly what? Backwards.
Yeah.
So plot is the result. It's not what precedes it. And so to say I'm going to outline my book and write it, it's like that's writing backwards. What I feel like it makes more sense is to write the story not plot based, but pursuit based. What is this character pursuing? What struggles does he have? What tension arises? How does he resolve those in unexpected and satisfying ways? And then move the story forward through that. So I'm not a huge guy of trying to say follow a plot formula or template, but there's tons of stuff out there that will take you through that step by step. And like on page 20, you introduce subplot B and all this. I'm like, that's just baloney. I don't believe in any of that stuff.
Yeah. For those looking to buy a book on learning how to write, I thought Story Trumps Structure was incredible. As a matter of fact, I'll just kind of toss this out here. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you at any of the presentations you were at, but when I wrote my first book, I started back in 2000, and
Hmm.
I was so excited. One of these people self-publish your book, right? Just run out to a vanity press, and
Oh,
oh, and it sucked, terrible. But I went back years later after I pulled these four books off the shelf because I was only going to write one book. Just one of that bucket list
hmm.
thing, get it off the list, and it turned out to be a 4-part series.
Yeah.
I pulled them off the shelf because it literally took me. I had to do rewrites on that first story. I realized it was still a good story. It took me
Yeah.
20 years to get it right. 20
Oh
years.
no.
Now, after I read
Well,
Story Trump Structure, I started working on a new series, a Gonzo Chronicles series, and I sort of took your seat of the pants outline because it's not full length
hmm.
novels; they're like novellas, 150, 160 pages.
Yeah.
And leading in with all the action, get the action out, and then worry about the plot as it unfolds. And that made that writing process actually so seamless. It was almost like
Hmm.
I just sat down and almost got it the way I wanted on the first draft.
That's amazing. Well,
Um,
good for you. That's great. It's
so yeah, if you haven't read that
yeah.
book, go check it out. If you want to be a writer, if you want to write a book, it's on Amazon. Story Trump Structure. But no, but it was really good. Now you do these seminars often, right? You're all over the country with these. How often are you doing these?
Well, I do teach, sometimes at writers' conferences. I was just in Australia a couple weeks ago. I was just in Florida. I'm going to be doing a seminar here in November in Eastern Tennessee, and then I'll be in Orlando. So sometimes I'll do like an intensive 4-day conference with just 12 people. So I do those once a year. So we have writers come from around the country, around the world. And so we'll just really go in depth for 4 days. So that I teach with Bob Dagoni. So we have a lot of fun with that. It's a lot of work though. It's so much work because we critique up to 50 pages of people's novels and then teach for about like 8 hours of lecture plus all of the critiquing. So those are fun. And but a little bit different only for specialized people who really focused on their novels. But I really just love, just inspiring people to tell stories, to tell their stories, to improve their, their novels. So I enjoy really that any opportunity that I get to get out there and do that, as long as I can still keep chomping forward on the novels that I'm trying to write myself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I did want to
Yeah.
ask being living in Northeast Tennessee, do you get any inspiration from the area to write any particular works?
Yeah. So my first novel actually takes place in the Asheville area. So I wanted to do something in this area. And then my latest novel, it does take place, Broker of Lies, which comes out next year, actually takes place kind of in Northeast Tennessee. A lot of it does. So I love this area. I moved here many years ago, fell in love with it. So anytime I get the opportunity, I try and sneak it in. One of my other books, a young adult book called Curse, takes place over kind of in the Smoky Mountains. So yeah, so over the years, anytime that I can, I kind of try to land a scene or a story in this area.
It's just as old as these mountains are, and all the
Yeah.
history. I can imagine there's probably so much inspiration. I did want to ask you about one of your books. I just started it, Quest for Celestia.
Yeah.
Um, was this a rewrite of an older book? Did I read that somewhere?
Well, basically many, many years ago, there was a book called The Pilgrim's Progress that came out, but back in like the 1600s. It was an allegory. And so I thought, what if I followed sort of the plot of that story, but not as an allegory, but told it as an adventure fantasy story. And so I tapped into some of the themes from the Pilgrim's Progress and tried to write sort of a Narnia Lord of the Rings type fantasy story with some of those themes reoccurring. It was a lot of fun. It was fascinating. So it was actually the first book that I wrote many years ago, and then it went out of print. But then another publisher picked it up and they're like, we want to republish this. I was like, well, great. It's written. So that's easy. So I thought, well, maybe I better look at it just to see if there's any little changes I want to make, throughout the book. And in truth, I actually ended up rewriting every scene of the book. So the book, it's much better than the original version, but it is based on some of the themes from the Pilgrim's Progress. It's a really fun, it's a fun fantasy read, and so I worked on that quite a bit because I wrote it and I basically rewrote it again about 5 or 10 years after it came out.
Yeah, I'm just now getting into that book, and I'm obviously a big fan of Lord of the Rings and
Yeah,
Narnia, so I'm probably going to be pretty fascinated with this. Just kind of tossing
I
this
hope
out there, being a fan of fantasy, did you get a chance to watch Game of Thrones? Were you into that series?
I watched some of Game of Thrones, and the thing was, it was a little bit more graphic, I guess, with the nudity and kind of some of that than I expected. So than I anticipated. But no, I love fantasy, and I actually had George R. R. Martin on the Story Blender a couple of years ago. I interviewed him about Game of Thrones and his approach to writing as well. It was really fun to have him on.
Okay, yeah, I want to get into the podcast here in a little bit and ask you
Yeah.
about that. Before we kind of jump onto some other questions I had for you, there was one particular book that you have that I just kind of soaked this up. It was a sci-fi book, Synapse.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of just to kind of I'm not going to give any spoilers because it was a great book, and
Hmm.
sci-fi fans go read this. It's set 30 years in the future in Cincinnati, and I lived in Cincinnati for a number of years, so I started reading this. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Um, artificial intelligence is pretty far advanced, and humans and robots, I guess, are living together, and neighbor, just in this different kind of world. And the cognizant robots are, I guess, they're called artificials.
Hmm.
So in this book, your main character, Kestrel, and you have the other one of the characters, Jordan, which is an AI.
Hmm.
Um, I did kind of want to just kind of toss this out here too, because that was a very deep book.
Yeah.
When you started
Yeah.
thinking about it, um, not just like these, what the AIs do. I guess the concept. I'm trying to find the words for this. What do they like? What do they know, and then what do they believe? Do they come to the point where they actually have beliefs? And because we deal with Kestrel, who's a minister, and she's
Yeah. Yeah.
pregnant and just had a baby at the very beginning of the book, and then this harrowing scene where
Mm,
she's in the beginning, right after
mm,
giving birth, and just I'm not going to ruin the scene, but it's a pretty chaotic scene. But
yeah.
that's such a powerful question. Is there hope, or is it hope or an illusion? Is it? Yeah, I've read that somewhere. Someone had asked that, but it was such a deep question. It's like a very Isaac Asimov like, and I wanted to kind of toss that out to
Well, I
you. With
appreciate that. Yeah. No, I appreciate that comparison a lot. I love sci-fi, I always have. And for me, there are a lot of books and movies and so on have asked this question about AI, artificial intelligence, obviously, and cognition of machines. And I thought, well, what about artificial belief? Like when machines have free will, consciousness, and self-awareness, let's just say that day comes 30 years in the future, whatever, what will they choose to believe? And as you pointed out in Synapse, there's this robot Jordan who is assisting Kestrel, this minister, and basically he remembers a previous owner had actually taken her own life, and she had written a note that said, I don't want to live unloved," and he let her die. So, but he did love her, not in a romantic sense or something. This wasn't Westworld or something like that, but he cared about her. Now he goes to Kestrel and he's like, "How do you find forgiveness?" He's like, "You're a minister. How do you find forgiveness?" She says, "Well, you talk to the person that you wronged and then you ask him to forgive you." He's like, "Well, what if you can't? What if they're gone?" He's like, "Well, God forgive me." And she's like, "You're a robot. You don't need God to forgive you, And he's like, "But I'm a morally free agent. I made this choice. I want to know if redemption is available." And so these are just the kind of some of the questions. It's a thriller, it's a high concept, high stakes thriller, but I wanted to allow the characters to ask some of these really interesting questions that I hadn't really seen asked before in different sci-fi books and movies. So it was a lot of fun to write. I'm really glad I did it. If they enjoy the ride and it makes them ask some questions, then that's fantastic.
Yeah, and sometimes these questions are uncomfortable, even for us to think about, because we're in the very beginnings of a world where we're starting to rely more on AI, and what is it capable of, and in the world of Elon Musk, I think everyone's kind of championing him right now with what he's done with Twitter, but this is the same guy who wants to be able to put chips in our brains and download our souls into a mainframe. I mean, so how are we protecting our humanity? So there's a lot of deep questions.
But I think it's great stuff to talk about and think about, and of course, all big questions are great material for big stories. So yeah,
they definitely are. Which leads me to I did want to bring up one of the things that you've talked about repeatedly in your seminars and your workshops is the topic of conflict, and how that makes for a better story, not just for writers, but how readers can as you were talking, that's what I was thinking about, how we can do it as a writer to make our stories better. But as I'm listening to you during these workshops, I'm thinking, wow, we should have readers in here, people that don't write and read and listen to this from this perspective. I wonder if they would read stories differently. Can you talk a little bit about conflict in the writing process?
Well, every story is driven forward not by plot and not by character, but only through tension. Tension is the only thing that drives a story forward, and tension comes from unmet desire. So at its core, really, a story about not so much actions that are taken, but desire that's pursued. And so if you get what you want, there's no tension, there's no story. And so stories are really in basically intention infused action, where we want something, we pursue it, something gets in the way, that creates more tension, escalates it, and we try to then eventually resolve it in a way that hopefully we get what we want, or maybe we don't. And the end of the story might depend on the genre that it is and so on. But so within a story, there's tension within three different realms. So there's internal tension. This is a question that needs to be answered. There's external tension. This is a problem that needs to be solved. And there's interpersonal tension. This is a relationship maybe that might need to be restored or initiated. And so when I think of stories, I think of struggles within each of the realms. And I'll often ask myself, well, what does this character want? And what's getting in the way of them achieving or obtaining, avoiding it, whatever it might be. And so one easy way to think of it is this way. Every character enters every scene hoping for something. What is it? If you don't know what it is, you don't know what your story's about. And if you don't know what gets in the way, you don't probably have any struggles. You probably don't have any story. You just have someone going out to achieve something and live happily ever after. So stories are all about what you said: obstacles, struggles, tension, unmet desire. These are the things that really drive a story forward.
Yeah, things that are just out of grasp that your protagonist really wants, but can't get
it.
Yeah,
can't get it.
So it's very important. Like, that's why I thought it'd be great to have a reader sit in these and just take notes, because you when you learn more about something from a writer's perspective, you tend to read differently. It's like reading different novels or different writing styles, like story trumps structure. Well, that's going to impact the way I write, or whoever else writes that's reading it. You've been writing for a number of years. When did you first start? And was there a writer out there or a book that you picked up that kind of like gave you that bug that you wanted to start writing?
That's a good question. I've always loved storytelling. I grew up reading short stories, especially, particularly loved short stories, short fiction, especially science fiction and horror. And so I kind of grew up on Kuntz and King and others. And And then eventually I said, I just want to tell stories myself. I remember I was reading one book one day, and I was actually teaching writing, I think in India, if I remember right, with this book. But I was reading this book. It was all the rage. Everyone was talking about it. And I read it, and I was like so angry when I got done. I like threw it against the wall. And I was like, if that's the best that's out there, I can do better than that. Then I heard this little voice inside of me say, "Oh, yeah, prove it." I was like, "Oh, okay. Now I got to prove it." So then that was really the impetus to write The Pawn, my first thriller. And I tell people sometimes get angry at mediocrity. I actually have a sign in my office that says "Rage Against Mediocrity." And for me, I really want to tell and write amazing stories, so stories that really entertain people, hopefully get them thinking about things in a new way. And I feel like it's very easy to write mediocre fiction. A lot of people kind of tend to drift toward that because it's not as much work. Man, I'll work at my books until I feel like this is really the best that I have to offer the world, and then send it out. So I'm not as prolific as some of my friends are. They'll have more books out than I do, but I just have been sort of obsessed with this idea that I want it to be worthy books. And so I don't know, probably don't make as much of a living as I could if I would write faster, but just it takes me a long time to actually get my books together and get them out there.
How old were you when you wrote Paul?
How old was I?
Yeah.
I don't know. Whenever that was like in 2005. So I guess
Okay.
17 years ago.
Okay.
Uh,
So,
but no, I was in my 30s really. When I wrote The Pawn. So I didn't get started with novel writing until a little bit later. I wrote other books for a while, nonfiction, inspirational books, and different types of books, but I guess it was 2005. Now that I think about it, that I really worked on The Pawn and got that book together. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a long time ago.
it does say, it seems like a long time ago when I started writing too, um, but yeah, I do appreciate the fact that you put quality over quantity, because people can churn out a lot of books. And are they, I give a book about 10, 15, 20 pages. And if I'm not into
Uh,
it, I just put it down. I'll
yeah.
try any book that long. But after that, if you don't have something to hook a reader, and I probably put more books down in the last 2 years than I've kept
Mm.
reading, which is sad to say.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I do the same. I don't always finish a book, and I remember this friend of mine that I met. His name is Davis Bunn. Anyway, so he wrote a book back a number of years ago, and it came out. He was at a book signing, and this guy next to him was a famous author. Had a long line of people buying his books, and Davis has no one in his lines. Like, I wrote a book too. Here I am. Come on, buy my book. Anyway, so finally, this lady comes walking up, very reverently carrying her book, right? Or carrying his book, right? So she comes up and she says, "Sir, is this a worthy book?" And he's like, "Yeah, it is a worthy book." And so she said, "Would you kindly sign it for me?" So he signed it. It was the only book he sold that day. And I still remember that when he told me that story, I thought, I want to be able to do that. Like, I want to be able to look someone in the eye if I ever write a novel and say, yes, that is a worthy book. And so that story is in my mind with every book that I write. I want to be able to do that. I don't want to look at someone and say, yeah, just kind of put that one together, threw it out there, but check this one out or whatever. I
Yeah.
want to be able to say, okay, this is might not be your cup of tea. Maybe you don't like thrillers and suspense. You like cozy mysteries or something. That's fine. But that's the best that I had to offer the world at that moment in my life. And so yeah, so for me, I don't know. I mean, it's just my approach, it's not better or worse. I know some people like to spin out books that are kind of the same and get the cookie cutter kind of versions, but that doesn't work as well for my kind of my approach. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote an article on Substack, um, books that everyone should read. And I had a
Hmm.
list of 50 books that I put down that I think everyone should read. Do you have like, if 3, 4, 5 books that you think everyone should read? I mean, whether it's your books per se or just books in general that meant a lot to you.
Hmm. Boy, it's interesting. Novels, you're talking about like fiction.
Yeah, or fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah. I mean, well, a couple of books that influenced me a bit. One was called The Book of the Duncow, won the American Book Award back in the 80s. And but really it's a short book. It's kind of an allegory, but the thing was it really taught me to write tight, to choose every word. Like I feel like every word in that story mattered. And so that really taught me to write with that in mind. There's a series of books in the 70s called the Singer Trilogy, which was sort of like spiritual, but kind of like allegory. I don't know what to would say. They're kind of fantasy, but they really taught me to marry together like spirituality and story in a way that I had never seen before. I like horror stories. I've read, a lot of different ones of those through I'm just trying to think of like influential books where I'm like, that book was amazing. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just have so many books coming to mind that I don't know which ones to tell you.
When you've read thousands of books, it's kind of hard, I guess, to pinpoint one down
I
without like
don't know.
plenty of time to think about it. Yeah.
I do the same thing though on my podcast. I sometimes ask guests, I was like, what's the one book that people need to read before they die? Not yours, but some other book. And they're like, how do I choose one? So yeah.
What, just a couple off the top of mind, like for whatever reason, even though I don't write anything remotely like a classic novel, Cannery Row by Steinbeck. Just the fact that all the characters in there, they're not so black and white. They're all shades of gray. They all have these different faults and problems, and there's not one perfect character or hero type in there. And great story and a masterful storyteller, Steinbeck was. Now, I have a hard time reading some of his other novels, but that one really grabbed me. Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gatsby is an amazing, amazing book. And anybody
now, did you read his other one? What's the other one that everyone talks about with Fitzgerald? Tender or something?
Tender is the Night.
Tender is the Night, I think. Yeah. Did you ever read that one?
Yeah, I'm actually rereading it right now. It's funny you should ask.
That's on my shelf because someone told me about Fitzgerald and they're like, oh, people who love Fitzgerald will usually say, okay, this one is better than The Great Gatsby. I don't know what your view is, but so I was like, I got to read that then. And so I literally bought a copy sitting on my shelf, the Tender Night or whatever. Yes.
Tender is the Night. It's a good story. But he's my favorite author. So
okay. Got it.
Reread several things. Tales from the Jazz Age is very good. I just really like that time period. And he seemed to capture it really, really well. And a lot of people over the years have tried to make that movie of The Great Gatsby.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie flops every single time because it can't capture, I think, the spirit of the book right. The only one that I really liked was early 80s or late 70s with Mia Farrow and Robert Redford. Great version of The Great Gatsby. Sort of caught the mood of the era. But
interestingly enough, I read a lot of poetry and philosophy, which might sound a little strange, but like I love how poetry, every word, has so much weight to it, and just philosophy because I can ask big questions. So if you looked at my list, you'd be like, look at my bookshelf, you're like, what do you read? That's crazy because you write suspense thrillers and you write, you read literary and you read poetry and philosophy and everything, but yeah, it just informs the way that I structure it.
Yeah, my bookshelves are so varied about different things. If you like classics, if you really like the Catcher in the Rye, if you like that story, Fitzgerald wrote one called This Side of Paradise, and it's very, very different, but there's similar themes. Obviously, he doesn't use all the language that Salinger used, but because there were F-bombs all over that story, Catcher in the Rye. The kid really loved the cuss. So, but Fitzgerald is a little bit more refined, in his work. But that's a really good Fitzgerald story. I think probably the one that would rival Gatsby would be The Side of Paradise, in my opinion. But what do I know, right?
Humble opinion.
But it's good. That's good stuff. But I did want to ask about your podcast. You have a podcast as well. Tell us a little bit about that and where can we find it?
Yeah, it's called the Story Blender, and really you can listen to it wherever you might listen to podcasts. It's available all the different platforms and so on. And also you can go to thestoryblender.com for more information about our guests and so on. But no, it's been really fascinating. I've had the chance to interview some of the leading writers in the world, and so, Dean Koontz has been on, and George Martin, Orson Scott Card. You like fantasy and sci-fi, science fiction, and James Patterson. I just interviewed him, so we're posting his interview here in November. So it was really, it's just kind of these authors to spend some time and just basically I pick their brain and say, tell me what makes a story work. Like for you, what is it? So it's almost like you can sit in on a master class with some of these amazing authors and sort of hear their hints and tricks and tips. And so selfishly, it's been my opportunity to really pick the brains of some of the best storytellers alive, but also hopefully to share it with the audience as well.
So I guess it's on Spotify or iTunes. They can find it anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
yeah.
Are you going to do a master class at some point, or have you already done one?
I've not done like a video curriculum or something like that. No, I haven't done that. We'll have to see someday, maybe. I really like teaching in person. And so I've seen some different video formats wherever they have an instructor doing, lectures and so on. And I just find that when I'm actually with people teaching them, it's more vibrant and alive. So if I ever did something, I think it'd have to probably be live. I don't know how that would work, but yeah, someday maybe.
Well, for those listening, if you ever want to go to one of his live events, I would suggest people sign up for your email list. Where can they do that at?
Yeah. StephenJames.net, the website there. It's kind of all things Stephen James. So you can find my books. You can find information about the podcast, the newsletter, everything. StephenJames.net.
Okay. So Christmas is coming up. So if you want a signed copy of one of Stephen's books, I guess I can contact you through the website too, right?
Just email me. We'll figure it out. We'll get you a signed book. That sounds good. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, Christmas is coming up. I mean, what's a better gift than a book? I get them every year. That and Amazon cards. It's like my two biggest gifts. But Stephen, I certainly appreciate you coming on and talking a little bit about your work and your newest book. So hopefully we'll see you again. I'll get to see you doing a presentation again. I know there's a spring fling coming up, a one-day writers retreat in the region, and I'm not sure if the guild has contacted you for that as well, but if not, you're probably going to be contacted. But hopefully we could do some things. Glad now the world's opened up after COVID. We can all kind of spend time together
get
again.
Out and get back to it. So, well, I appreciate your questions and just the time to sit and share a little bit with you about the books that I've done, and I wish you all the best in your projects, and hopefully you'll continue to be able to write and pursue your dreams.
Well, thank God I have a day job, right? So that works. But I certainly appreciate you coming on, and come back anytime. You have so many books. I mean, we could talk about each one. I've really enjoyed. I'd really probably like to pick your brain a little bit on the Quest for Celestia after I finish it. So,
yeah.
Hey, thanks
next time around. We'll dive into it.
Absolutely. StephenJames.net. Make sure you listen to his podcast. And thanks everybody for tuning in to this episode. And we'll see you down the road.